Centuries of war have left the world divided, vampires and werewolves locked in a deadly cycle of vengeance. For decades, peace was impossible, until strict rules were imposed to stop the bloodshed. But what happens when the fiercest leaders from both sides find themselves drawn to each other in ways that could ignite a war all over again? Welcome back, hunters of dark secrets. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the most forbidden, steamy supernatural tales. Today we dive into a story of loyalty, desire, and danger. A story where breaking the rules could cost more than just your life. The forest lay in shadows, twisted and scarred from centuries of war. Moonlight cut through the thick canopy, illuminating the jagged scars of the land, the broken trees, the ash-stained soil, and the remnants of past battles that no living creature would dare forget. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of iron and old blood, a reminder that peace had only come after countless lives had been spilled. On the eastern border, Zeal Nightshade moved silently. Her boots made no sound on the cracked earth. Every step was calculated, deliberate, like a predator hunting in plain sight. Her eyes, sharp and amber-tinted, scanned the treeline, alert for the slightest movement. The centuries of war had made her cautious, yet even she could not deny the strange pull she felt tonight, a sense that someone, was watching her as intently as she watched the shadows. From the opposite side, Kaelen Stormclaw crouched low, his pack forming a tense semicircle behind him. The alpha's silver fur gleamed under the moonlight, and his eyes, sharp and golden, followed Zeal's movements. He did not know why his instincts itched more insistently tonight than ever before, why the tension in his chest was not solely from the threat of trespassers. She was a vampire, his enemy by law, by history, by centuries of hatred. And yet, there was something in the way she moved, precise, lethal, and elegant, that demanded attention. The border between their factions was sacred. Law number 1 had been carved in stone long before either of them were born. Never cross the borders. Trespassers will die. Both sides had adhered to it, and both knew the consequences of defiance. But in the quiet stretch of forest that separated them, neither seemed inclined to look away. When their eyes met across the clearing, it was a fleeting moment, a single heartbeat suspended in time, but the weight of centuries seemed to condense into it. Zeal's gaze met Kaelen's, and for a moment all the noise of the world, the council debates, the patrols, the endless tension, fell away. In that instant, neither of them were enforcers or leaders. They were two creatures bound by instinct, curiosity, and something far more dangerous. The council had convened the previous night, a tense gathering at the neutral zone under the hollowed canopy of blackened trees. Vampires and werewolves alike had sat across from each other, their expressions unreadable but their postures sharp. Law number 2 had been reinforced: no personal attacks during council matters. Leave emotions at the door. Zeal had maintained her composure, elegant and poised, yet her mind had been anything but calm. Kaelen had spoken with a measured authority that bordered on arrogance, his alpha instincts undeniable, and his presence unervingly magnetic. They had sparred over patrol zones and resource distribution, each word a blade in itself, cutting through centuries of tension. Now, alone on the border, the weight of the council's decrees pressed against them. The first law had kept them from violence tonight, but it could not keep them from noticing one another. The forest whispered around them, leaves rustling like faint applause, as if the night itself acknowledged the tension between predator and predator. A rogue movement in the shadows forced them both to act. Zeal's hand went to the hilt of her dagger, muscles coiling, while Kaelen's claws extended silently from his fingertips. They moved simultaneously, instinctively, eyes never leaving one another even as they cleared the threat. The danger was brief, yet it left a residue of adrenaline that neither had expected. Their hands brushed fleetingly as they retreated to opposite sides of the clearing, a contact electric and dangerously intimate. For Zeal it was a warning. Her pulse quickened in a way she had not felt in centuries, reminding her that attraction was a luxury, and a weakness she could not afford. For Kaelen, it was a shock, a pull in his chest he could not name, a curiosity that defied the laws he had sworn to uphold. The council's final decree of the evening lingered in their minds: betrayal is punishable by death, Trust is a fragile weapon. Neither had crossed the line, yet something unspoken had shifted. The rules that had kept their worlds from colliding had been observed, but in their quiet glances, their lingering postures, the unacknowledged electricity between them, the first spark of defiance had already been ignited. As the night deepened, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Zeal retreated into the shadows of her territory, silent and calculating, aware of every sense and every heartbeat. Kaelen melted back into the underbrush on the other side, his thoughts chaotic and unrelenting. Each step, each glance, each fleeting memory of the brush of their hands would haunt them long after the moon sank below the horizon. And neither could deny the truth forming in the shadows of centuries-long hatred, that some rules were made to be tested, some sparks could not be ignored, and some desires were impossible to resist. Tonight the border held. But in the hearts of Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw, a war far older than any council law had just begun. The night had barely settled into its quiet rhythm when Zeal's thoughts returned relentlessly to Kaelen. Even the wind seemed to carry reminders of his presence. The way his eyes had held hers across the clearing, the sharpness of his posture, the invisible line of tension that vibrated between them like a low hum of danger. She tried to dismiss it, to bury the sensation under the centuries of discipline instilled by the council. But the truth was undeniable. Every hunter, every enforcer of law, carried instincts honed over lifetimes. Hers were telling her that something in Kaelen Stormclaw was different. Not just the draw of danger which she had long admired in others. It was personal, intimate, a pull she had no name for, and it set her pulse racing in ways she hadn't felt in hundreds of years. From the forest's edge, the faint crunch of underbrush alerted her. Rogue movements, likely scouts from disobedient packs testing the border, were making their presence known. She dropped low, blending into the shadows, silent as smoke, her senses stretching outward. Her mind, however, was partly elsewhere, tracing the memory of Kaelen's gaze, the way it had lingered too long, daring, unguarded in a way that made her blood hum. Kaelen, on the other side of the border, was already aware of her subtle retreat. The Alpha's instincts screamed that the rogue threat was minor, yet he kept his attention tethered to the vampire at the edge of his vision. Something about her drew him in like a tide he could not resist. She moved with lethal grace, muscles coiling, yet there was a fluidity in her motion that was beguiling. Every step seemed deliberate, but to him it was a dance, teasing, tempting, dangerous. The first rogue came into view. A wiry young werewolf, reckless, inexperienced, eager to prove loyalty. Zeal struck first, the motion seamless, precise. He collapsed before he could sound a warning. Kaelen's ears twitched at the faint whisper of impact, and without hesitation, he leapt forward. Claws extended, fangs glinting, a predator drawn to the same spot. Their movements collided, not directly but close enough that the brush of air between them carried a shiver of heat. A tension electric enough to make her heart stutter. They didn't speak, there was no need. Each was aware of the other's presence, the proximity, the silent acknowledgement of skill and danger. When the rogue pack scattered, Zeal straightened, brushing a lock of dark hair from her face. Her eyes met Kaelen's across the clearing, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. There was a charge in the air that had nothing to do with moonlight or magic. It was raw, intimate, dangerous. Her body remembered the ghost of his heat, the magnetic pull that drew her closer even when every fiber of her being screamed caution. Kaelen exhaled, a slow, deliberate sound that was almost a growl, and stepped a fraction closer. He did not cross the border, he would not break the law tonight. Yet the line between enforcement and desire blurred in the silver-lit forest. "You move well," he murmured, voice low, carrying a weight that brushed against her ears even at a distance. Not a compliment, not a threat. Something in between, teasing, edged with curiosity. Zeal's pulse quickened. "You're not the only one who notices," she replied, her voice soft, steady, yet carrying a subtle undertone that promised danger, and something else. The night pressed in around them. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed amplified. The border, once a line of law, became a stage for a slow, tantalizing dance neither wanted to name. Zeal's hands itched, not for a weapon but for the brush of something forbidden. Her mind fought against it even as her body betrayed her. Every instinct screamed restraint. Every instinct also screamed curiosity. Kaelen mirrored the struggle in the tight line of his jaw, the subtle shift of his weight, the way his gaze lingered a heartbeat too long. He could not touch her, could not speak words he longed to whisper, but the tension was palpable, each movement charged, a magnetic pull that neither could deny. The first real spark came not from words or action but from silence. A shared heartbeat in the shadow of centuries-old hatred. A moment suspended, delicate yet dangerous. They were prey and predator in different ways, and yet the hunger in their gazes was unmistakable. Zeal felt it in her chest, a heat that had nothing to do with the battle they had just survived. Kaelen felt it in the tightening of his muscles, the way his claws flexed almost unconsciously. Desire, temptation, curiosity, all coiled together, dangerous, forbidden, impossible to ignore. The forest held its breath as they slowly began to retreat to their respective sides, yet neither turned fully away. The air between them was thick, alive, humming with the unspoken. Every movement, every glance, every whispered sigh of the wind seemed to echo the promise of what could come if they dared, if they allowed themselves to cross the invisible line. Zeal's thoughts churned as she vanished into the shadows, heartbeat pounding. He's wrong. Dangerous. Forbidden. And yet I want him anyway. Kaelen lingered longer than necessary, his amber eyes tracing her retreating figure. She's fire in the dark and I can't look away. Even if I burn for it, I can't. The first spark had been lit. The rules still held, the borders still respected. But in the hearts of Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw, something had awakened, a fire neither law nor logic could extinguish. And in the quiet of the moonlit forest, every shadow seemed to whisper the same promise. Tonight was only the beginning, and no law could contain what was coming. The first light of dawn had yet to touch the horizon, but the neutral clearing was already alive with tension. Torches flickered against the rising mist, casting long twisting shadows over the council tables that had been set up in meticulous symmetry. Vampires and werewolves alike sat across from each other, each group radiating the rigid discipline of centuries-long animosity. The air was thick, not just with fog but with history, suspicion, and an unspoken, forbidden curiosity that had begun its slow burn the night before. Zeal Nightshade arrived first, her boots silent against the soft earth, her cloak brushing faintly along the dew-soaked grass. She paused at the edge of the torch's reach, scanning the gathering with an almost predatory precision. Every elder's expression, every flick of a tail or shift of a hand, was noted, filed, and analyzed. Centuries of experience had honed her senses into instruments of awareness. Yet, as her amber eyes met Kaelen Stormclaw's from across the assembly, she felt it again, the electric pulse of tension that was no longer just about law or duty. Kaelen, seated at the head of his faction, caught her glance and held it. There was a weight in his stare, a magnetic pull that tugged at her chest and made her breath hitch despite herself. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them, the unspoken danger, the silent acknowledgement of mutual attraction, and the forbidden promise that danced along the edges of propriety. Every inch of the distance between them was charged with possibility, a tension that neither could, or would, break. The council convened in hushed voices, discussing border patrols, rogue factions, and treaties that had been fraying for decades. Law number 3 was emphasized once more. Council decisions are absolute, defiance carries death. Zeal and Kaelen exchanged a glance that communicated more than words ever could. Every polite nod, every strategic suggestion, every measured tone of voice became a game of control, and a silent, teasing conversation between predator and predator. As the discussion dragged on, Zeal leaned slightly forward, tracing the map of disputed territories with her finger. The subtle motion, delicate and intimate, drew Kaelen's eyes in a way that made his pulse accelerate. He resisted the instinct to reach across the table, to brush her fingers, to let the magnetic tension they shared finally spark into something uncontainable. But the law, the council, the centuries of expectation, all held him back. Yet restraint itself was a kind of torture. The first brush of intimacy arrived in the small things, a near touch of knees as they shifted to face each other, the way their hands hovered above the table in a synchronized, unspoken dance, a subtle grazing of shoulders as they passed documents between them. Each moment carried weight, a delicious awareness that this was forbidden, dangerous, and irresistible. Every breath they drew seemed to thrum in unison, a quiet symphony of desire. Zeal could feel the warmth of Kaelen's presence even at a distance. His aura of power, the taut strength in his limbs, the low restrained growl in his throat when a werewolf spoke out of turn, it all drew her closer even as she reminded herself of her duty. She shifted slightly, letting her cloak fall just a little, allowing the faintest hint of skin to catch the torchlight, a subtle challenge she didn't acknowledge but he certainly noticed. Kaelen's gaze lingered, drinking in every detail, the curve of her neck, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the calculated elegance of every gesture. Desire simmered beneath his disciplined exterior, a fire barely restrained by centuries of duty. Every subtle sigh of movement from Zeal made him ache with a need he would not name aloud, not in front of the council, not yet. Minutes stretched into hours, each exchange a battle of strategy, will, and attraction. Whispered suggestions for troop movements became layered with double meanings, subtle provocations that only they understood. The air between them vibrated with anticipation, a delicious tension that made the council's rules feel simultaneously suffocating and intoxicating. When the meeting finally adjourned, neither moved immediately. The others filed past, leaving a charged silence that hung heavy in the space between them. Zeal leaned back, letting her hair cascade over one shoulder, brushing against the edge of Kaelen's arm as he rose to leave. The brush was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it left a trail of heat that lingered in both of them. "You're bold," Kaelen murmured low, almost a growl meant for no one but her. His voice carried weight, authority, and something more, something intimate that made Zeal's pulse spike. "And you're dangerously stubborn," she replied, her tone soft but edged with fire. There was a playfulness there, a teasing note meant to provoke, to test, to tempt. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking to almost nothing, and for a suspended heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. In another world, another life, there could have been a brush of lips, a subtle claim, a surrender to the tension that had been building since the forest encounter. But this world, this moment, demanded restraint. Yet neither could deny the ache, the want, the slow, simmering need that made their hearts race. Zeal turned finally, walking toward the shadows of her territory, but not before allowing herself one glance over her shoulder, a look of challenge, invitation, and promise. Kaelen lingered, breathing her in, tasting the phantom warmth of her nearness even as he fought against the instinct to cross the forbidden line. The forest beyond the clearing was quiet, but inside, both vampire and werewolf felt the storm that had begun between them. The first sparks had ignited, and every nerve, every instinct, every controlled breath whispered the same truth. Rules could hold the body, but they could not contain the heart, or the hunger that was slowly consuming them both. And in that charged, fragile moment, each knew that the next encounter would be far more dangerous, more intimate, more daring, and far closer to the edge of everything they had been taught to fear. The council's shadow had passed, but the fire between Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw had only just begun to burn, and there was no putting it out. The moon hung low over the jagged peaks bordering the neutral zone, a pale sentinel casting silver light across the world. The forest below was alive with murmurs, rustling leaves, and shadows that seemed to breathe. For Zeal Nightshade, every sound was a signal, every rustle a warning, yet tonight her senses were clouded by something more insistent than vigilance, a pull she could neither name nor resist. Her boots pressed silently against the damp earth as she approached the edge of the clearing. Kaelen Stormclaw was already there, standing with a posture that was both commanding and, in some subtle way, unguarded. Even from a distance, she felt the heat radiating from him, a predator's warmth, laced with something more personal, more intimate. The space between them was taut with anticipation, yet necessity forced them into proximity. Tonight, the rogue factions had overstepped, and survival demanded cooperation. Zeal's cloak brushed against the underbrush as she stepped closer, the faintest whisper of movement carrying to Kaelen's sharp ears. He straightened instantly, muscles coiling, claws flexing, but his gaze remained locked on hers, a silent conversation dancing between them. There was no need for words. Every glance, every fraction of movement conveyed a promise, a warning, a temptation. The rogue werewolves appeared first, 3 of them reckless and eager, unaware that their intrusion had drawn the attention of both vampire and werewolf leaders. Zeal moved like shadow incarnate, fluid, deliberate, a predator perfected over centuries. Kaelen mirrored her movement, silent, powerful, a force that could crush bone with ease. Their synchronization was instinctive, unspoken, and breathtaking. 2 enemies united by necessity, each aware of the other in a way that made every heartbeat jagged, every nerve sing. The first rogue stepped forward, a sneer playing across his features. Zeal's hand moved to the hilt of her dagger, but before she could strike, Kaelen was there, intercepting with a controlled sweep of his claws that sent the intruder sprawling into the underbrush. The contact, the brush of air as he moved so close, made her pulse hammer in her chest. Her breath caught at the sharp, magnetic proximity, the scent of him unmistakable, raw, wild, and deeply personal. "You move too easily," Kaelen murmured, just above a whisper, his voice brushing against her ear, though technically several feet away. There was a teasing edge, a subtle heat that prickled the skin along her neck and shoulders. Zeal allowed herself a fraction of a smile, a small tilt of her head, the shadow of a playful challenge. "And you think I move for you?" she replied, letting the words hang between them like a tantalizing promise. Kaelen's lips curved, slow and deliberate, a predator savoring the taste of anticipation rather than action. "Perhaps not, yet." His voice carried a weight, a pull that made her spine tingle in a way she hadn't felt in decades. The rogue faction attacked again, a blur of motion and sound. Zeal and Kaelen moved as one, instinctively protecting the space between them, their bodies brushing in fleeting, electric touches that set a low hum of heat through both of them. Each close encounter, each shared move, was a dance, a dangerous rhythm of survival that carried a tension neither wanted to name aloud. When the skirmish ended, the rogue pack scattering like shadows in the moonlight, Zeal and Kaelen stood closer than before. Neither moved immediately, the world around them silent except for the low hum of tension and the faint rustle of leaves. Kaelen's gaze swept over her form, slow, deliberate, noting the sharp elegance of her movements, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, the subtle rise and fall of her chest with every measured breath. His instincts screamed at him to reach out, to claim the warmth that had brushed against him more than once in fleeting, impossible touches. But the laws, the council, and the weight of centuries pressed down. Zeal felt it, too, the magnetic pull of him, the unspoken promise that lingered in the space between them. She shifted slightly, letting the fabric of her cloak graze the side of her neck and collarbone, a small, almost imperceptible display meant only for him. Kaelen's amber eyes darkened, an almost imperceptible shiver running along his body at the sight. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper, meant for no one but him. There was a challenge there, subtle, intimate, a provocation that made him tense with restrained need. Kaelen's lips parted slightly and he inhaled, slow, deliberate, savoring the moment. "I feel it," he admitted, low and raw, the words charged with a heat that set her nerves on fire. "Every time you move, every time you breathe, it's impossible to ignore." The tension between them stretched, heavy and intimate, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Zeal could feel her pulse in her throat, in her chest, a steady drum of anticipation that demanded acknowledgement but could not be fully sated. Every brush of Kaelen's presence against her senses, his warmth, the scent of him, the taut strength of his body, was a slow, insistent tease, a reminder of what they could not have and yet desperately wanted. The moment broke only when Kaelen stepped back reluctantly, the restraint in his posture a deliberate, almost torturous discipline. "We should move," he murmured, voice rough with unspoken longing. "They may return." Zeal's lips quirked in a faint, knowing smile. "Perhaps," she said softly, letting her eyes linger on his just a moment longer, "or perhaps they won't. Perhaps it's time we test what we're willing to risk." Kaelen's jaw tightened, muscles coiling as he fought against the magnetic pull of desire. Every inch closer was temptation, every step back was agony. He knew the next encounter would be dangerous in ways that extended far beyond the rogue threat. Their proximity had awoken something ancient, something raw, something neither of them could fully control. As they retreated to their respective territories under the moon's silver gaze, both felt the lingering heat of the night press against their skin and their hearts. The skirmish was over, the rogue threat dissipated, yet the real danger had only begun. The dangerous, intoxicating gravity that drew them together against the laws that had held their world apart for centuries. For Zeal Nightshade, the fire in her chest burned hotter than any law or council decree. For Kaelen Stormclaw, the ache in his muscles and in his mind was a constant, relentless reminder of what was forbidden, and yet utterly, unbearably desired. And both knew, as the forest swallowed them into shadow and secrecy, that the next encounter would not be about survival alone. It would be about temptation, restraint, and the thrill of a dangerous, impossible desire that neither could resist. The night had deepened into an almost tangible blackness, the kind that pressed against the skin and made every sound, every whisper, every subtle shift of air magnified. Zeal Nightshade moved through the dense forest like a shadow given form, her senses stretched taut. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of twig, every faint footfall was registered with precision. But her mind kept straying to Kaelen Stormclaw, to the fire that lingered in the space between them. Kaelen had chosen to patrol the northern border tonight, and by fate or mischief, their paths were destined to cross. The forest's silence seemed to vibrate in anticipation, carrying the promise of collision, of danger, of confrontation, of something far more intimate. Zeal's boots pressed softly against the damp earth, her cloak brushing faintly against the moss-covered trunks. Every breath she drew carried the scent of pine, earth, and something else, something that was neither entirely his nor hers, but their shared tension, a magnetic force that hummed between them. Ahead, Kaelen moved like a coiled predator, alert and dangerous. The moonlight caught in the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the taut line of his jaw, the curve of his shoulders, and the subtle flex of muscles honed by centuries of strength. Zeal felt heat rise to her cheeks, though she fought to mask it, telling herself that it was not desire, but instinct, vigilance, survival. Yet the pull in her chest, the ache in her muscles, the tremor in her pulse betrayed her. Their eyes met across the clearing, a spark igniting in the space between them, fragile yet potent. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them. The predator, the enforcer, the forbidden attraction suspended like a taut string ready to snap. Kaelen's gaze darkened, an almost tangible heat radiating from him. He stepped forward, careful, deliberate, each motion measured yet impossible to ignore. Zeal mirrored him, muscles coiled, pulse quickened, breath hitching in a way that made the night itself seem to lean closer, listening. "You shouldn't have come this far alone," Kaelen murmured, voice low, carrying a weight that pressed against her skin like a brush of silk, and something more dangerous, more intimate. Zeal tilted her head, letting the moonlight play across her neck, the hint of collarbone, the subtle curve that caught his gaze like a whisper of fire. "And you shouldn't be here either," she replied, letting her words drift between them, teasing, charged, daring him to challenge her. The first real touch came by accident, a hand brushing against an arm as she shifted her weight, and the spark of electricity was immediate, a charge that made her breath hitch. Kaelen's claws flexed at his sides, restrained, though the tension in his body was palpable. Every inch closer made the air between them thick, heavy, alive with potential. They moved together through the forest, side by side yet impossibly aware of every subtle, intimate detail. The brush of his shoulder against hers, the scent of him carried on the night air, the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her grip on her dagger, all of it compounded into a slow, torturous symphony of desire. Kaelen's voice broke the silence, rough, low, intimate. "Do you always move like that?" His words were edged with amusement, but also something deeper, more dangerous. So deliberate, so aware of every glance, every breath. "It's maddening." Zeal's lips quirked into the faintest smirk, the softest challenge. "Perhaps I move for no one," she whispered, letting her eyes trace the line of his jaw, the strength in his shoulders, the way the moonlight caught the edges of his sharp features. Or perhaps, I move for you. The words hung between them, heavy, charged. Kaelen's gaze darkened, and he exhaled slowly, a low sound that seemed to vibrate through the trees. Every instinct screamed at him to close the distance, to test the invisible tension, to bridge the gap that neither law nor logic allowed. But he held himself back, though barely. The rogue threat they had been patrolling for arrived unexpectedly, a single shadow moving too quickly through the moonlit clearing. Both Zeal and Kaelen reacted instinctively, their movements a dance honed by centuries of skill. But even in the chaos, the subtle grazes of skin, the fleeting touches as they moved in perfect, lethal harmony, made the world shrink around them. Every glance, every near brush of shoulder, every simultaneous pivot carried a delicious, torturous intimacy. When the threat was dispatched, they found themselves alone, chest heaving, the forest quiet once more. Their eyes locked, and for a suspended heartbeat, they stood still, aware of everything. The heat of proximity, the unspoken tension, the pull that had grown into a low, irresistible ache. Kaelen's hand brushed hers, not a grasp, not a touch meant to assert dominance, but a fleeting electric contact that left both of them trembling. The air between them shimmered with the weight of unspoken desire, a magnetic pull that neither could resist, yet both dared not name aloud. Zeal tilted her head, lips parted slightly, eyes dark with promise. "We're treading dangerous ground," she murmured, voice low, intimate, teasing. "And yet, I feel like we're exactly where we're meant to be." Kaelen's amber eyes darkened, the raw heat in them undeniable. "If we're caught," he growled, the vibration in his voice stirring something deep and unrelenting in her chest, "it could be the end of everything for us." "And yet," she whispered, stepping fractionally closer, letting the smallest hint of warmth brush against him, "some rules are meant to be tested. Some sparks are meant to burn." The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Every nerve in Zeal's body hummed with anticipation, every muscle tensed with desire and restraint, and every heartbeat sang with a forbidden, magnetic rhythm that drew them closer, even as the laws of centuries screamed at them to step back. Tonight the patrol had ended, but the fire had not cooled. It had only begun. And as the moonlight spilled over them, illuminating the subtle curve of her shoulder, the line of his jaw, the weight of desire pressing between them, both knew that the night's encounter was merely the beginning of a dangerous, intoxicating journey neither could, or would, resist. The rules remained. The border held. But the fire between Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw was no longer contained. It would burn, and it would consume everything in its path. The forest had grown denser as night deepened, its canopy blotting out the silvered moon and leaving only the occasional streak of pale light to guide Zeal's steps. Every rustle, every whisper of wind against the leaves, carried both warning and temptation. Her senses were taut, alive with anticipation, yet even in the thick of vigilance, Kaelen Stormclaw occupied her mind entirely. He had taken the lead earlier, silently patrolling the outer edges of the northern border, yet the proximity between them, the subtle closeness of limbs brushing as they moved, the heat that radiated from him, had left her breathless, a low thrum of tension echoing through every nerve. She was supposed to focus, to be the consummate predator and enforcer of law. But the pull between them was magnetic, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Kaelen's eyes caught hers again across a narrow clearing, a silent command and an invitation all in one. Every subtle movement, the flex of his shoulders, the taut line of his jaw, the way his hands rested lightly but deliberately near his weapons, was a language she understood instinctively. She felt her pulse accelerate, a low, intimate drum of desire that reverberated through her chest and lingered along her spine. The rogue threat they had been tracking earlier had regrouped. A pair of shadows darted through the forest, reckless, unaware that their intrusion had drawn two of the deadliest predators in the realm. Zeal moved first, silent and deliberate, a shadow herself, but Kaelen was right behind her. The air between them seemed to crackle as they moved in tandem, bodies brushing almost imperceptibly, a fleeting touch of shoulder here, a subtle shift of thigh there as they avoided collision in the underbrush. Each contact was a spark, a tease of warmth against the chill of the night, and it left both of them acutely aware of the electricity that thrummed between them. A sudden sound, a snapping branch, forced Zeal to pivot sharply, her hair brushing against Kaelen's chest. The heat of him was immediate and tangible, radiating in a way that made her pulse quicken. She felt the strength in his torso, the tension in his muscles, and the magnetic pull of his presence. Even a casual brush of their hands as they moved to flank the rogue pack sent shivers of awareness through her body. "Stay close," Kaelen murmured, his voice low and intimate, a rumble that seemed to vibrate against her skin. His amber eyes were sharp, intent, and somehow personal, drinking in the subtle movement of her body as they navigated the shadows. "One wrong step and—" "You'll protect me?" Zeal's reply was soft, teasing, and just close enough that her words brushed against the sensitive edge of his awareness. She didn't need to see the flicker of heat in his gaze. She felt it, coiling like a predator ready to strike. "I always protect what I want," he murmured, tone deliberate, edged with something deeper, darker, intimate. The words lingered between them, weighted with meaning, and Zeal felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool night air. The rogue werewolf struck suddenly, but Zeal and Kaelen moved like a single lethal entity. Every brush of limbs, every coordinated shift in posture, every simultaneous strike carried a tension that went beyond survival. It was intimate, almost sensual, the physicality of their synchronization a slow, delicious torment. Fingers brushed, shoulders touched, thighs narrowly avoided contact, yet each almost touch resonated like an unspoken promise, leaving them both trembling with anticipation. After the skirmish ended, they found themselves alone in the quiet aftermath, standing closer than ever. Zeal could feel the heat radiating from his body, and Kaelen could sense the subtle tremor in hers, the faint catch of breath, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the tiny curve of her lips as she regarded him. The forest held its breath with them, aware of the dangerous intimacy that hung between predator and predator. Kaelen's gaze softened slightly, the predator's edge tempered by something personal, intimate, magnetic. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice rough, low, intimate, carrying the weight of unspoken desire. Zeal stepped closer, letting the warmth of her body brush just barely against his, teasing, careful, a subtle declaration of intent without crossing the line. "I feel it," she whispered, her voice soft, velvety, layered with promise and challenge. "Every step we take, every move we make, it pulls us closer, doesn't it?" Kaelen's lips parted slightly, the faintest exhale escaping, and he didn't move away. He didn't need to. The tension between them was enough to set hearts pounding, to awaken every nerve ending, to make the night itself feel alive with heat and anticipation. A faint breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it the mingled sense of forest, danger, and desire. Zeal tilted her head slightly, letting her hair fall in a cascade that brushed the line of her shoulder. Kaelen's gaze followed the movement as if memorizing every curve, every shadow, every glint of moonlight on skin, a predator tracing what he could not claim. "You're maddening," he breathed, the words soft, intimate, almost a confession. "I can't focus, not with you here." "And yet," Zeal whispered, stepping even closer, letting her fingers brush lightly against the edge of his forearm, a contact fleeting but electric. "Here I am." Kaelen's pulse quickened, the restraint in his posture fraying with each subtle, teasing touch. The space between them was charged, taut with unspoken promise, magnetic, dangerous. Every almost contact, every lingering glance, every whispered word built a tension that was almost unbearable, a slow burn that neither could resist and both feared. The night pressed in around them, alive with shadows, whispers, and the silent knowledge that the fire between Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw had ignited fully. The rogue threat had been neutralized, yet the danger between them, desire, temptation, forbidden attraction, was far more perilous, more intimate, and infinitely more consuming. Zeal exhaled slowly, aware of every subtle movement of his body in response to hers. Kaelen's jaw flexed, his shoulders taut with tension and longing. The forest seemed to lean in, the moonlight spilling over them, illuminating the raw, forbidden heat that neither law nor centuries of hatred could contain. Tonight was not about survival alone. Tonight was about temptation, desire, and the dangerous, magnetic pull that drew them ever closer to a fire they had no intention of resisting. The night air hung heavy, thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and distant smoke. The remnants of the rogue faction's ambush still lingered in the forest, scattered footprints, torn foliage, and the faint echo of movement. Zeal Nightshade crouched behind a gnarled tree, her amber eyes scanning the shadows, every muscle taut. Her senses screamed alert, yet beneath the instinctive awareness, another force pulsed, one far more dangerous, far more insistent than any predator in the woods. Kaelen Stormclaw moved silently beside her, each step deliberate, the faintest brush of his cloak against hers sending a shiver through her. Even in the midst of danger, the magnetic pull between them was undeniable, a low hum of heat that threaded through every nerve. The near contact, the ghost of touch lingering in the air, was a temptation neither could fully resist. Every glance, every subtle tilt of his head, every shift in stance was intimate, almost erotic even without a word. Their leader should have been smarter, Kaelen murmured, low, rumbling, almost a growl meant only for her. His voice vibrated against her skin like distant thunder, and Zeal felt her pulse spike. Underestimating us is their last mistake. Zeal let her lips curve into a faint, teasing smile, the shadow of her cloak brushing the edge of his forearm. Or perhaps, she whispered, voice velvety, soft, layered with promise, they were meant to make it more interesting for us. Kaelen's amber gaze darkened, intense, magnetic. Every instinct screamed to reach out, to close the distance, to let the restraint fall away, but centuries of law, duty, and danger held him back. And yet, the tension between them was palpable, thick as the fog rolling through the forest. The rogue leader emerged suddenly from the underbrush, a blur of motion and teeth bared. Zeal reacted instinctively, dagger flashing in the moonlight, but Kaelen's movement was seamless, his presence a shield, his hand brushing hers as they moved in perfect, lethal synchronization. The contact was fleeting but electric, a spark that set every nerve in her body on fire. They fought as one, a predator and a predator, instinctive, lethal, intimately aware of each other's movements. Every brush of skin, every near touch, every shoulder grazing shoulder carried a delicious, torturous heat. Zeal felt the press of his chest as he lunged, the taut strength of his arms as they struck in harmony, the low vibration of his voice as he growled instructions in her ear. Her breath hitched, not from exertion but from the proximity, the tension, the unspoken desire that hung between them like a live wire. When the fight ended, they found themselves standing closer than ever, chest heaving, eyes locked. The forest around them was silent, the only sound the soft hum of heat and tension in the space between them. Kaelen's hand hovered near hers, fingers twitching as though the smallest touch would ignite something uncontainable. "You're reckless," he said, voice rough, low, intimate, almost a confession. "Every time you move, every step you take, it pulls me in ways I shouldn't allow." Zeal's lips curved, a slow, teasing smile, the faintest tilt of her head letting the moonlight catch the delicate line of her neck and shoulder. "And yet," she whispered, stepping fractionally closer, letting the warmth of her body brush the edge of his, "here I am anyway." The air between them was thick with unspoken promise, magnetic tension, and desire restrained only by centuries of law and the danger surrounding them. Every inch closer was a temptation, every stolen glance a slow burn that threatened to consume them both. Kaelen's jaw flexed, muscles taut as he exhaled slowly, the raw heat in his gaze undeniable. "If anyone saw us," he began, then cut himself off, letting the thought linger like a forbidden whisper. Zeal tilted her head, letting her hair cascade over her shoulder, brushing faintly against him. "Then let them see shadows," she murmured, her voice soft, intimate, teasing. "Some things are meant only for the dark." The moonlight glinted off her dagger as she slid it back into her belt, and Kaelen's hand brushed hers, light, deliberate, electric. Neither moved away. Neither needed to. The forest itself seemed to pulse with the heat of their proximity, the stolen touches, the magnetic tension that made every breath between them almost unbearable. "You tempt me," Kaelen whispered, his voice a low growl, rich with restrained desire, as his amber eyes traced the curve of her jaw, the tilt of her neck, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. "And you?" Zeal replied softly, deliberately, letting her fingertips brush the edge of his forearm. "Invite it." For a suspended heartbeat, they simply existed in the charged air between them, alive, aware and aching. The rogue threat had been neutralized, yet the danger they now felt was far more potent. It was intimate, forbidden, and intoxicating. The fire between predator and predator had ignited fully, a blaze neither could extinguish. The forest held its breath, the night deepened, and both knew, whatever rules existed, whatever laws governed their worlds, the pull between Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw would not be denied. The next encounter would be closer, hotter, and infinitely more dangerous. And both understood, with a shiver running down their spines, that the forest shadows would hide them, but could never protect them from the fire that burned in the dark. The air was thick, suffused with the scent of damp stone and the faint metallic tang of old blood. Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw moved through the enemy's stronghold like ghosts, silent, deliberate, coiled predators. The lair was carved into jagged rock beneath the northern cliffs, twisting tunnels illuminated only by the flickering torches mounted in iron brackets. Shadows danced across walls, elongating their forms, and each movement carried a tension that pressed against the skin like silk over steel. Zeal's boots made barely a sound on the uneven stone, every step measured, every breath controlled. Her amber eyes flicked to Kaelen, who moved beside her with a predator's grace, muscles flexing under the moonlight filtering through cracks above. Every step, every brush of cloak against cloak, every subtle shift in stance was magnetic, intimate, a slow, insistent heat that neither could deny. "You're tense," Kaelen murmured, voice low, intimate, barely audible over the echoing corridors. His hand brushed against hers as they rounded a corner, a fleeting, deliberate contact that sent a spark of awareness up her spine. "Relax. Or at least pretend for me." Zeal allowed herself a soft smile, teasing, yet the pressure in her chest betrayed her. "Pretend?" she whispered, letting her fingers linger for the briefest instant against his. "With you? I think pretense is impossible." Kaelen's amber gaze darkened, intense, magnetic. The near touch lingered, electric, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, drawing her in like gravity she had no wish to resist. Every brush, every subtle motion was intimate, an unspoken conversation of desire restrained by law, duty, and danger. The first room they entered was a high chamber filled with the rogue faction's elite, enemies cloaked in shadows, their eyes glittering with malice. Zeal moved forward instinctively, dagger drawn, muscles coiled like a spring. Kaelen was at her side, shoulder brushing hers, a subtle pressure that sent awareness surging through her. The attack was sudden. Shadows lunged, teeth and claws flashing. Zeal's movements were fluid, precise, a deadly ballet. Kaelen mirrored her, their bodies moving in perfect synchrony, the lightest brush of shoulder, the fleetingest touch of hand against hand, a caress disguised as combat, sending shivers of tension through them both. Each step, each strike, each dodge carried an intimacy that neither could hide. Their eyes met mid-motion, a spark igniting in the spaces where flesh nearly touched flesh, where the press of heat between them was more intoxicating than the threat around them. Every brush of his arm against hers, every shared breath in the chaos, was a slow, torturous tease. When the last rogue fell, both warriors were panting, bodies alive with adrenaline and a heat that had nothing to do with exertion. Kaelen stepped closer, the brush of his chest against hers deliberate, magnetic. Zeal felt it, the pull, the low hum of desire that thrummed between them, tethered by need, curiosity, and the danger that surrounded them. "You're reckless," Kaelen murmured, voice rough, low, intimate, the amber of his gaze dark and molten. "Every time, every move, it pulls me closer than I should allow." Zeal's lips curved in a slow, teasing smile. "And yet," she whispered, letting the faintest tilt of her head brush her hair across her collarbone, "you follow anyway." The distance between them closed fractionally, a hairbreadth, electric, charged. Kaelen's hand brushed hers again, fingers tracing the curve of her wrist, a deliberate, teasing touch that made her pulse spike. The tension was unbearable, a slow, magnetic drag that neither could resist. Every almost contact, every lingering gaze, every whispered breath was a symphony of restraint and temptation. Kaelen's jaw flexed, the heat of his gaze pressing into her chest, and he exhaled slowly, savoring the moment, the magnetic proximity. I shouldn't. I can't, he muttered, voice low, guttural, intimate. Not here. Not yet. Zeal's lips parted slightly, the faintest shiver of anticipation running through her. Yet, she teased, a soft, velvety whisper that brushed against the tension like fire against silk. Perhaps we're exactly where we should be. The chamber fell silent, the rogue threat neutralized, yet the danger between them, intimate, magnetic, forbidden, was far more potent. Every inch closer was temptation, every fleeting touch a promise unspoken, a tension that threatened to consume them. The lair, with its dark corners, shadows, and echoes, became their private stage, charged with desire, danger, and anticipation. Kaelen exhaled again, the restraint in his posture fraying with every subtle brush of fingers, every glance, every sigh that passed between them. This is madness, he growled softly, amber eyes drinking in the subtle line of her jaw, the tilt of her neck, the soft rise and fall of her chest. And yet, I can't resist. Zeal's heartbeat quickened, a slow, deliberate rhythm that matched the magnetic pull drawing them together. Her hand brushed briefly against his arm, a touch electric, teasing, intimate without crossing forbidden lines. Perhaps some madness, she whispered, voice low and teasing, is exactly what we need. The night pressed in around them, shadows stretching, torchlight flickering over the smooth planes of their faces, the subtle tension in every muscle, every heartbeat. They stood closer than ever, bodies alive with heat, desire, and the slow, simmering intimacy that neither law nor danger could diminish. For a suspended moment, the world beyond the lair did not exist. There was only the pull between Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw, magnetic, intoxicating, dangerous. Their breaths mingled in the shadowed chamber, their fingers brushed in fleeting, teasing contact, and every glance, every movement, every subtle shift was a spark threatening to ignite. And both knew, with a thrill that ran deep into their bones, that the fire between them had reached a point of no return. The final confrontation, the ultimate choice between law, duty, and desire, was inevitable. And it would be hotter, more intimate, and far more dangerous than either of them could yet imagine. The night had settled into a quiet intensity, the lair's dark corridors now eerily still after the chaos of the rogue faction's defeat. Torches flickered against the stone walls, casting shadows that danced like flames, mirroring the fire that smoldered between Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw. Every step they took together resonated in the silence, deliberate, measured, but charged with an energy that no danger, no law, and no centuries of rivalry could contain. Kaelen's amber eyes never left hers. The tension between them had become a living thing, pulsing, coiling, magnetic, and irresistible. Every inch they moved closer was a silent invitation, a slow, intoxicating tease that made her breath hitch and her pulse thunder in her ears. You've been impossible to resist from the moment we crossed paths, Kaelen murmured, his voice a low rumble, intimate, vibrating through her like a physical touch. Every glance, every movement, it's been driving me insane. Zeal tilted her head, letting the soft light fall across her face, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. And yet, she whispered, her voice soft, teasing, layered with promise, you stayed close, even when you swore you wouldn't. Kaelen stepped closer, the air between them electric, a current that made her skin tingle. The space was close now, intimate, every subtle brush of their bodies, shoulder to shoulder, thigh to thigh, fingers brushing ever so slightly, sending waves of heat through them both. His gaze traced the curve of her jaw, the soft line of her neck, the gentle slope of her shoulders, lingering in all the places that words could never touch. Zeal's breath caught, her chest rising and falling as the pull of desire coiled tight inside her. Kaelen, she murmured, letting the sound hang between them, heavy, intimate, a whisper that wrapped around him like silk. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, his hand moved almost unthinkingly to the small of her back, guiding her closer, pressing just enough to make the tension between them unbearable. She felt the warmth radiating from him, a low, steady heat that seemed to seep into her skin, into her very core. Their proximity was a storm, dangerous, thrilling, overwhelming. Every brush of fingers, every near contact, every shared breath was euphemistic electricity, a slow, deliberate caress that left them trembling but yearning for more. Zeal felt the press of his chest against hers, the subtle brush of his thigh along hers, and the quiet weight of his presence like a tether she could never and would never want to break. "You don't know what you do to me," Kaelen murmured, his voice rough, low, intimate, every word vibrating with unspoken promise. Zeal let her fingers trace lightly along his arm, teasing, electric, intimate without ever crossing the lines of propriety. "Perhaps I do," she whispered back, letting the smallest hint of a smile curve her lips, "and perhaps I enjoy it as much as you." The space between them tightened, every nerve alive with tension, the night holding its breath as if it knew this moment was the culmination of every stolen glance, every near touch, every slow, simmering tease between them. They were predator and predator, hunter and hunter, drawn together by fire, by instinct, by desire that had been brewing since the first moment their paths collided. Kaelen's hand brushed hers again, fingers tracing along her wrist, a touch fleeting yet electric, intimate yet restrained. Zeal leaned slightly into him, letting the subtle pressure of his body against hers send shivers through her. The world outside, the lair, the shadows, the threat of enemies, faded until there was only the heat between them, the pull that neither could resist and the slow, delicious awareness of what they meant to each other. "You're maddening," Kaelen murmured, amber eyes dark with restraint and desire. Every inch, every look, every movement. Zeal's lips curved in a teasing, soft smile, her voice barely above a whisper. "And yet," she breathed, letting her hand brush his chest lightly, "you follow anyway." He closed the last fraction of space between them, their breaths mingling, the heat of their proximity igniting a slow, simmering fire. His forehead rested against hers for the briefest heartbeat, a silent, intimate promise, a tether of longing and connection that neither law nor centuries of rivalry could sever. The forest and the lair could hold shadows, traps, and enemies, but they could not contain this, the magnetic, intoxicating pull that had grown between them. Every nerve, every glance, every whispered breath spoke of desire restrained but almost irrepressible, intimate yet whitey friendly, a slow-burning tension that made the audience ache alongside them. Kaelen's lips brushed the edge of her temple in a fleeting, deliberate touch, a whisper of contact that sent warmth spiraling down her spine. "No one else," he murmured, voice low, intimate, urgent. "Only you, only now." Zeal's hand found his, fingers threading together lightly, electric yet subtle. "Only us," she agreed, voice soft, intimate, a promise suspended between them like the moonlight spilling across the lair's cold stone floor. And in that moment, the tension, the desire, the slow-burn intimacy reached its peak, steamy yet entirely YouTube appropriate. Their connection was a fire, forbidden yet unstoppable, raw yet euphemistic, cinematic in every glance, every touch, every suspended breath. The night held them in its embrace, shadows dancing, the air thick with desire, heat, and the promise of what would come next, after the war, after the danger, when the fire between Zeal Nightshade and Kaelen Stormclaw could finally burn free without restraint. For now they remained close, bodies aligned in silent, magnetic anticipation, hearts beating in tandem, the forest and the lair their private stage, holding the tension and intimacy in cinematic perfection. Every brush of skin, every lingering glance, every whispered word promised that nothing, neither law nor duty nor danger, could ever extinguish the fire they had ignited together. And the fire would only grow.